Welcome back. Uh, Let me start with I would like to send some greetings to Alan Chadwell for his kind words. And I hope he finds my other videos as informative or at least as challenging as the one he liked so much. So thank you again, Adam, from UK. And having said that, let me start with the issue that this video is going to be about is media, mass media, especially broadcasting. Why is it so mediocre? Are they just accomplices of some special interest or just mediocre, incompetent? And you can see that in the Gallup polls is that they are not deceiving anybody. They are losing credibility, but and they are losing credibility to the internet, where the options are not necessarily much better, but is very sad when you cannot count with Walter Cronkite when you need him the most. Having said that, this video is going to be about some questions the media, especially if you consider the academic credentials these journalists are supposed to have, and that they have missed grossly. And if you allow me, I'm going to put images and links to my tweets that show that at least some people notice these issues and that which were never reported by media. For instance, in Ukraine, you must remember General Milley complaining, and the White House in general, the Pentagon in general, complaining in 2023 that Ukraine, where they're a bit hard, they cannot understand the concept of combined arms. And these stenographers from the media dutifully wrote down every single word without questioning the concept of combined arms. Well, you have from in Blitzkrieg in Second World War the concept of a kind of war that is quick, is based on speed, on disorganizing logistics for the enemy so they cannot react and to your attack, and therefore forcing them to surrender. This concept was evolved in the day also during the Second World War, and more recently in Show&Awe in 2003 in Iraq. So it's not something that is hidden in some dark pages of history. It's somebody that journalists, even the journalists from working class origins of the past, should have noticed. And yet these people didn't. They never questioned Milley about how could Ukraine, without air superiority and overwhelming force, could counter the Russians. Then, very interlinked to this issue is the case of General Zaluzhny. You must remember that he wrote an op-ed in The Economist when he questioned that after the Americans, after us, had promised Ukraine all they needed to kick out the Russians, when the time came, the promises were not fulfilled. Just one example. The MICLIC systems, these are these anti-mine systems, were badly needed because we have wasted about 13 months in dithering and hesitation. Months that the Russians had invested in building the Surovikin line, that were these lines of fortifications, especially in the south. And what percentage of MICLIC systems we delivered after having promised the Ukrainians that we will provide them with whatever they needed? 15%, 15%. And then we were complaining that it was the Ukrainians who couldn't understand. They are so hard, these Ukrainians. They couldn't understand the concept of combined arms. General Milley, could you? Then when with respect to weapons, much was said about the need of Ukraine counting with long-range missiles to hit strategic targets in Russia, or not even in Russia, behind enemy lines that were posts of commands, weapons depots, logistical centers, command centers. Jack Watling has written extensively about this, and he's the most reliable source from the RUSI from the United Kingdom. So I'm not going to repeat myself. I have a video about this, the issue of Ukraine. And what happens with these long-range missiles that should be able to inflict strategic damage? Because as you have we have said, if you are barking about combined arms, you need weapons that are strong enough to destroy logistical centers, to disrupt the communications and the supply chain of the enemy. You cannot do that with cluster bombs or regular artillery. So after hesitating and dithering again, the Biden administration finally said, well, we will give you your data comes. Even though by then it was already too late to save the counteroffensive. But anyway, and when they send data comes, they send them. But they send the M39 version, that is the oldest version with a very limited range, and even worse, the warhead that was a cluster bomb warhead that wouldn't have made any difference. Just for example, the Kerch Bridge that was used by Putin to supply the southern front could have been destroyed by a regular ATACMS, but not by M39 ATACMS. So again, we could see brave Ukrainians, special forces inflicting damage, but that was damage that wasn't coordinated because Ukrainians didn't lack the armament we didn't provide them. And we could see the damage was not just isolated, but it was minuscule. It just closed one or two lanes of the bridge, and the bridge kept working on the remaining ones. So this is the help that the press has reported enthusiastically in number of dollars instead of in number of goals, because what matters is goals. This rationing, this procrastination on the side of the Biden administration has made the war unnecessarily long and wasteful in terms of treasury and lives. Apparently, it's going to end in a defeat, a war that could have been won. Okay. Then we had another bottleneck. And these people should know, because if you are going to report about national security issues, about military issues, you should know that one of your main bottlenecks is going to be training, because your troops have to be trained at the company and the brigade and at the brigade level to wider operations. And this was reported since January 2023, at least, because I have another article that I lost about the need of training, about warning about how this was going to be a bottleneck, a problem. And yet the press didn't say much. What happened with these journalists from Yale, Columbia, that couldn't have, apparently are not skilled enough to make some basic research. And the first time I got acquainted with the work of Jack Watling was from an old Washington Post article that precisely dealt with the issue of the Surovikin line. So even if you don't have time to read something about military history, or or at least watch some YouTube videos where people who know what they are talking about say something, you could at least have read your own newspaper, the Washington Post, because the article was there. You could have at least checked pages like the Institute for the Study of War or RUSI from the United Kingdom. The opinions were there. And yet you kept regurgitating the same inane questions that didn't allow the American public have an accurate idea of what was going on in Ukraine. Then you have the issue of the reserves. And this is particularly tragic because the reserve, Lawrence Tribe, a well-known jurist here in the United States, had an opinion in September 2023 about the legality of seizing Russia's assets in the United States to help Ukraine. And yet, when it was not clear in Europe, it was the White House in the United States hesitating, postponing, hesitating again, doubting. And this is not how you wage a war. It was not just that. It was that if, for instance, when it comes to the amount of Russian assets in the United States, the Washington Post reported that amount at $5 billion, while The Hill and Voice of America reported that amount at $60 billion. It can't be both. Have you ever seen one of these glamorous journalists asking somebody in the Pentagon which one is this? Is it 50, 60, or 5? Well, nobody. So the only thing that was widely reported was the final outcome, that was this watered down loan that was going to be delivered drop by drop, even though UK, the elections in the United States demanded quick action. Then it comes probably the most irritating issue, that is the narrative. The Biden administration presented the Ukraine war as a back alley fist fight, excuse me. So you were going to be with the small guy to level the things, and if the bad guy used a stick, you will give the Ukraine a stick, and if he, well, it was proportionality, the concept of proportionality, a very stupid concept that was critically adopted by the Biden administration. And nobody asked what was so obvious. What are going to be the effects of a Putin victory on the United States? Let me tell you, 2022, the effect on the food market. the effect of nuclear stability, considering that the increase the way tensions are rising are pushing other countries, even like Iran and China, to increase their nuclear arsenals. Let me tell you, the way they were going to weigh in Putin, if elevated to the status of senior partner, was going to weigh in the relationship between China and the United States, because China's long-term plans are directed not to Europe or the United States, they are directed to the global south. And in Putin's plans, exposed by Syria, I'd say, well, we see how Putin understands trade and foreign policy in the case of Africa, and a little bit in the case of Syria in the Middle East. So a privateer standard that would have prevented us from having a more healthy relationship with China. Rivals, but not enemies. Then, what one should wonder, is this premeditated? Are they really so stupid at the White House to believe that they can wear down Russia and have no effect on China? And so bad for the Ukrainians, but the matter was to weaken Russia. And why do I say stupid? Because for two reasons. Number one, the lifeline to Putin is being given by China. So that's why their economy has not flopped so far. Number two, unless you are trying to test the sense of humor of Ukrainians, if you come to tell them after more than 2 years of loss of lives and treasury that what you are going to give them was vague assurances like in the Budapest Memorandum and the Minsk Accords, they are not going to find it very funny. Zelensky and those who have who stood up to Putin are not going to be in a very good footing. And you might end up with another Yanukovych, another Russian puppet that is going to use all the help we have given Russia, excuse me, we have given Ukraine to help Russia. So, and it's not, if you consider the work of destabilization that Putin has been doing in Georgia, in Moldova, and other Eastern Europe countries, you should not be caught unaware. So, were you journalists from the mass media unaware? Because RUSI has a very good report about what would happen if Putin wins. Haven't you read it? Not even a little curiosity? No? Okay. Then let's move to another issue, China. Let me go very fast with the remaining ones. When with China, I believe, and I don't know honestly if we are still on time, but I believe that our goal should be bring our relationship with Xi to a kind of relationship like the one we had with Japan in the 1980s and 90s. We imposed quotas. It was sometimes Japan violated those quotas. We renegotiated, but life went on. No violence. Especially since the Chinese EVs in the auto market are going to the low-income market segment of the market, and especially because the overcapacity is not going to disappear by itself. So if this overcapacity directed to sports is not somehow processed, adjusted, they are going to, in the best case, go to a trade war that could end in a Cold War because they need to sell them. Otherwise, you would be assuming that Xi Jinping is going to accept with resignation the decline of the Communist Party in China just because you don't want to use rough tactics like dumping products even in the third world, in the global south. And what we have been done is instead of trying to get an accommodation with China in order to take Putin out of Ukraine and get a nuclear deal with Iran, which are not which goals that would not collide with Xi Jinping's goal of keeping those two countries inside the Chinese sphere. We have been selling weapons to Taiwan and the Philippines. And the presidents of these two countries have been banging the chest, defying China, convinced that the United States would have to come up in their defense. There is no war game scenario in which these two countries can stand up to China, stop China, without USA involvement. So what were you thinking? If they had a chance to at least delay the Chinese, but there's no war game scenario saying that. So what were you thinking? What was your goal with selling weapons to two countries? So, and these are my questions. Those were not the questions of the regular media. Then let me bring some questions about Israel. If I mention you the Olmert plan, Ehud Olmert, former prime minister from Israel, most probably you would have no idea, even though his plan was is all plan from the time he was a prime minister, but always was again published by Vatican News in 2023, and this year by the Times of Israel. You would have no little or no coverage about the plan. And why is it important? It is important because it presented an alternative to the naive, ridiculous policy of the White House in the Middle East. Biden's policy was, I will be good with Netanyahu, and that way he will agree to a ceasefire that was going to be a real ceasefire. My answer to that is grow up. Not only you cannot trust a real ceasefire on the two parties that gain the most by killing it, like in this case is Netanyahu's wing, because it's not Likud. Gallant is also part of Likud, and he was at odds with with Netanyahu. We are talking about the Netanyahu, Smotrich, Ben Gvir wing. And on the other side, Sinwar, the mastermind of October 7th. So, what would happen? What would come to that? What would come from that? So it's not news. It should not be no news that they got no real ceasefire. At the most, they have gotten a photo op in Lebanon that is continually violated by both parts. And you say probably is that because you are not optimist. No, yeah, I'm not, because there is a precedent in 2014. Do you remember John Kerry during the Obama administration? His words, a hellhole of a pinpoint operation, when he described with sarcasm the operations the IDF in Gaza after he realized that Netanyahu had deceived him. It's not just that. Even in 2015, Netanyahu got to speak to Congress, and this time with even Democratic votes, Netanyahu got to speak to Congress. So how could history repeat itself so soon in such a ridiculous way, and you, mass media, not have noticed it? And probably this is too demanding, but we can make parallels to the Algerian Revolution from 1954 to 1962. The media is letting Netanyahu get away with short-term military victories that have never beaten insurgencies in the past, unless you destroy the country, for instance, in Chechnya or Central America in the 80s, the Chechnya Second War. And we even have that the Jewish settlers playing the role the Piet Snors played in Algeria, and nobody in the mass media seem to notice the parallels. Let me remind you that soon after the French were victorious in the Battle of Algiers, they were kicked out of the country. So if you don't understand that Israel is an unconventional war, different from Ukraine, that is a conventional war, and you cannot understand the concept of an insurgency, what are you doing writing about these things or producing news shows about this issue? Well, then let me bring you two more cases. The economy. We saw in 2021 the clogging of the supply chain. And we saw we saw things that, let's be honest, the Biden administration could not have solved in the short term, like the interruption of cheap supplies. But we also saw lots of empty containers or unclaimed containers clogging the way, making more slower and more difficult to unload the ships that were making long lines in front of the ports of Los Angeles and other places. And my question is, why couldn't the Biden administration have used the Army Corps of Engineers at the Navy facilities to unclog the supply chain? And well, but this probably is such a novel idea. No, it's not such a novel idea. Somebody asked Biden in a town hall, why couldn't they use the National Guard? Biden said that they were considering it, and that was the end of it. The media never follow up on that answer. Actually, it should not have been the National Guard, but the Army Corps of Engineers and the Navy. And the worst is that there is a precedent. Roosevelt Civilian Conservation Corps in 1933 used the logistical support of the Army. So why couldn't you use, in exactly the opposite situation, because Roosevelt was battling depression, why couldn't you use the logistical support of the Army and the Navy to unclog the supply chain? No questions. Then let me bring you the case of Doggy. The Doggy is the agency or department. It still has not been defined, that the Trump administration is going to assess government efficiency. This should have been a democratic idea. Actually, in a very clumsy way, Obama tried to address the issue. But the Biden administration never addressed it. And it's terribly sad because there were multiple instances. For instance, when I wrote this tweet, it was because of reports of fraud in loans and help provided during the pandemic, and that were making a dent on the prestige of government, and yet no answer. And you know what? The Trump agency, Doggy, has declared that they are going to target not inefficient organization, not inefficient programs in which about which we could agree, but watchdogs of the industry, like the Federal Trade Commission or the watchdog for the financial industry. In times where, and you can see that in Pew Research, the Pew Research chart, when trust in government is at historic lows, you had to come up with a better narrative for government. Because if you are a Democrat, you need government to work. And yet you could see, if you are a Republican, especially a Republican, this new kind of Republicans, you don't care much because you just prefer to drown drown government in a bathtub, as Grover Norquist said. But if you are a Democrat, you need government to work. So I'm not taking this information from some dark corner of the deep web. Why the press couldn't have point this to the Biden administration. And finally, on the economy, you had after the irresponsible partial deregulation of the banking industry in 2017 during the Trump administration, and after in 2021 it was clear that interest rate would have to be risen. Nobody seemed to even consider what could happen if they raise interest rates. Who knows? Well, read some books, because what happens in a different scale, of course, but what happened is something similar to what happened during the collapse of the savings and loans. And the savings and loans were the first big banking collapse since the early 1930s, when new financial regulation was enacted. So why couldn't? Fortunately, the Federal Reserve at the last hour bail out some banks and prevented this damage from going much further. But the sloppy supervision, not because it not was just a matter of regulation, but also supervision. The sloppy supervision allowed banks like Silicon Valley Bank to fall. And that was basically because of the interest rate risk. And this, yet the media treated this as if it were some event in history that nobody could have known about. And now, finally, about the culture wars. We have let many cool activists at the left get away with reframing issues on which the lives of millions of people depend without questioning them. For these heirs of Stokely Carmichael, the priorities were not the Voting Rights Act, better schools in their districts, economic opportunity. No, They wear blackface, they fund the police, abolish ICE, and I have a deep resentment against these organizations because they help trivialize these issues. And why didn't the press, even some kept presenting Black Lives Matter as the heirs of Martin Luther King's legacy? Don't you check sometimes the works of think tanks? I mean, pure research. I know there are hundreds of literally or hundreds of think tanks, but I'm talking about pure research works about the priorities of the Black and Latino communities. They are not blackface or defund the police or nonsense like that. They are the heirs of the economic message of Martin Luther King. Yet the mass media doesn't seem to distinguish Martin Luther King from Stokely Carmichael. Let me suggest a book in 1968 about the decline of the popularity of Martin Luther King and the rise of Stokely Carmichael. It's an easy reading by Tavis Smiley. At least read that so you don't embarrass yourself by presenting one thing as an extension of the other. Actually, Martin Luther King consider this movement that is that it has been the core, the Black Power movement, as a nihilist movement, and yet you are presenting them as the heirs of Martin Luther King. So I have brought you so many examples of how the media is so mediocre, how it deserves the lost credibility, and probably some other day I will talk about the media in the internet. But you see, there are so many questions that need to be asked, and with your help, if you help me, hopefully one day I will be able to pose those questions to guests and try to bring visibility on the real issues instead of on the baloney we have been sold for so long and that have resulted in the election of Donald Trump. And having said that, let me leave you with our newscast.
Good evening. This is Brian Thomas Simons, and these are the main headlines of the hour.
A. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un once again launched ballistic missiles over the skies of Japan and South Korea. Chinese authorities declared that, according to the North Korean spokesperson, the skirmishes will stop as soon as the United States, Japan, and South Korea increase their food assistance to North Korea. B. Myanmar junta declares that a secret referendum has endorsed a ballot that will keep the current junta in the reins of government for life. The secret nature of the referendum doesn't allow to disclose details, like when it took place or who was allowed to vote, but it was held according to the will of the people, declared a spokesperson for the junta. C. President of Belarus Alexander Lukashenko declared himself the winner of Belarus's upcoming elections. There is no need to waste resources in elections when we already know the results. Besides, the nation needs to balance its budget, President Lukashenko declared.
This has been the news for this hour.
Sponsored by Working Class Christmas. Are you in between regretting your vote on election day and the Christmas gifts you can't afford? Afraid you will disappoint your children this Christmas too? No worries. Our community service Santa Clauses are properly ankle monitored, drug tested, Biden pardoned. And if your kids are not much into Santa Claus, we have our No Comprende line in Spanish and our alternative characters, Dollar Store Bugs Bunny, Unpaid Child Support Clown, and Non-Binary Robin. Christmas you can afford indeed. Call now. 202-863-8000.